Okay, so I am so excited to be joined by Kamini Wood. She is a certified professional coach working on limiting beliefs to help you move forward. So this is going to be a great conversation, and really, I think it's going to benefit so many people what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, for sure. And so just kind of going right into it, what brought you to where you are today? Like, where did you start from that brought you to helping the people that you do today?
So honestly, it was not a linear path. So I'll kind of take you back in time.
Yep.
I was born and raised in Connecticut, a small town in Connecticut. Both my parents were immigrants from India. My mom came to the States when she was in her teens, my dad in his 20s. My sister and I were brought up in this predominantly white town. So being the brown girl in a predominantly white town, a name like Kamini definitely sticks out. So there was a lot of elements starting from elementary school on of wanting to fit in and wanting to feel like I belonged. At the time, I didn't have a name for it. I just knew that there was this like always this undercurrent feeling of like I needed to do something to prove that people could like me, that I was just like them. And so I was definitely working towards people pleasing, didn't want anybody upset with me, would avoid conflict at all costs, whatever I could do to make people okay with me. And in the same vein, with my parents working so hard to provide for my sister and I definitely didn't want to be a burden. So my perfectionist personality absolutely took hold from a very early age, because I did not want to fail. I did not want to create problems for anybody, especially them. And so I took those two things kind of into adulthood. So I worked really hard, really wanted to excel at everything that I ever tried, especially school. Ended up in the dot-com industry back in the early or late 90s, early 2000s, and was working as a project manager. And in that role, was really involved in the resources of the employees as they needed to be assigned to different projects, and then that were running the project office for a large internet company at the time. From there, went on to run my husband's law practice, where once again I found myself wearing a lot of hats, but the main hat that I was wearing was the one where I was helping the employees who came on figure out where they wanted to be and how they wanted to grow and expand. So that was from my professional perspective. As that was happening in my personal world, I became a mom times 5. My oldest is now 21 and my youngest is 9, but my middle daughter actually started really showing people pleasing tendencies and perfectionist tendencies, and she'd really beat herself up. So a lot of anxiety was bubbling up for her. And that's, I always will say, I will absolutely stand by this, that my children have been my best teachers that I've ever had in life. And so as I was watching this mirrored back to me, I realized that that was actually coming from me and how I was showing up. So I really went through the process of my own self-evaluation and recognizing where, and that's where I learned where some of those old stories had come from and where I was holding myself back. Yes, I had gone through different experiences even earlier, but they always seem to get masked. Okay, yeah, that was a challenge, let's move on. This was the first time in my life where I really actually recognized, oh, that's that limiting belief, or that's that false story. So as I went through this self-transformation, I realized that the work, my professional career, kept bringing me back to helping people grow. And so I realized, wow, okay, my calling is actually to take that professional love with this experience that I've had as an individual, as a human growing and evolving, take those things, match them together, go get some actual training in working with individuals. I've gone through several specialty training programs as well, just so that I can really help clients however they assimilate information. And that's when my practice was born. It was out of the fact that it was more of a calling, as well as taking this experience that I had professionally and personally and saying, I really can take this and help other people move forward. And here I am today.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love how you can see your path, how it's like you were destined to do this. And it's like how life kept pushing you in this direction until you're like, yes, this is what I meant to do. So I just love that. And especially how it came that it was your professional career was doing that as well as at home. I mean, it's so profound and just gives you such a depth of information to take forward and experience. What
Take forward an experience. And also it gave me permission to realize, okay, universe, thanks for showing me in
Yeah.
every direction that you possibly can. I'll take the hint.
Yeah, sometimes you need that just to be like, almost smacked in the face with like, this is what you need to do, like, so I love that's the path that you took. And it's like all those things that you experienced, I'm sure through like the corporate world and everything has at least helped you, I'm sure in some way to have this wealth of knowledge in helping others. When your daughter was going through that, um, how did you kind of come to the realization that like the messaging was coming through you, that she was kind of experiencing this through you in a
Well,
way?
it's really interesting because only in hindsight was I able to track that back. And it really,
Yeah.
the telltale was she sounded like me. Like that was what my internal voice was saying, or my inner critic. And I realized I wasn't even speaking it out loud. It was how I was showing up. And she was just, I was modeling and she was just mirroring it back to me.
Yeah.
And so that was the moment where I was like, oh my gosh. So all of the, and we think we're masking. We're not. We might be masking very surface level, but we're still showing up in a way that is living into whatever that inner critic is saying, or whatever that false belief is saying. So if we have an I'm not good enough false belief, I was literally just on the phone with a client and he was saying, I've done this like pseudo confidence. And I realized that I kind of, I thought I was doing it, but I really wasn't. And that's the truth, because the false belief is still there of I'm not good enough. As much as we think that we're covering it up, it's going to bubble to the top. We
Yeah,
can't mask it forever.
absolutely. And I think just your energy conveys that too. When you have that, like you're always telling yourself this messaging, your energy is going to follow suit too. So it's like
Absolutely.
people can sense that for sure, especially when it's your own children. And yeah, it really is. And I love how you said that they're your biggest teachers. They absolutely are. It's like they make you look inside yourself so that you can be the best example for them to move forward. So I just absolutely love that. And I can relate to that. I have two children myself and I see where I'm like, oh yes, that came from me.
Oh yeah, yeah. I will say
Absolutely.
they're my best teachers, and they humble me every
100%.
day.
Absolutely. They will keep you honest with yourself. Absolutely. Yes. I love that. For yourself, like once you realized that you had these limiting beliefs and this internal dialogue, how did you begin to transform that into something that served you?
So, it's interesting because it's not something that you can just sort of suddenly are aware of it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, here we go. It
Yeah.
was really giving myself permission and grace to take my time with the understanding, and allowing the awareness to unfold over time. And as that unfolded, I could see how certain choices I was making was living into the false belief. So, for instance, my people pleasing actually came from the false belief that I had to prove my value or my worth, right? So, as long as people were happy with me or I was making them happy, then I was worthy. And so, coming to terms with that awareness, then I was at this place. I could find myself in this choice point of, now that I'm aware that I seem to be getting my worthiness from pleasing others, what's actually true for me? Where does my worthiness actually come from? And is it really extrinsic by pleasing others? Or is it from a place of the fact that by my own essence and being, I'm already worthy? And can I come to terms with that in and of itself as just an accepted truth about myself? And that was where the real work was, where it was coming to terms of, oh wow, me showing up and being Kamini, that already makes me worthy. I don't have to prove this to somebody else. And that's when I could start making those choices, like making a choice to no longer run my husband's firm and actually start my own business. Huge, scary choice, because for the very first time, I was willing to take a step and put my dream as a forefront versus constantly putting everybody else's in front of mine. And that's what people pleasers will do. They'll put everybody else's needs in front of their own. And what I really needed was something that I found pure joy in. I work with individuals every day and I get to the end of the day, I'm like, wow, wow, where did it go? Because I'm so involved and in flow with what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that I was miserable working at my husband's practice or at the .com. I always found joy in what I was doing. But the truth is, it wasn't my true calling. It wasn't something I needed and was being called to do. And the work that I'm doing now is I need to be doing it.
Mhm.
And it's such a difference.
Yeah.
But that was a huge shift for me because, here I am going through this self-transformation. It's like, oh, wow. Yeah. I have to break the news to my husband that I'm going to want to do something for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's incredible, especially when you have those people pleasing tendencies. That's really hard because you never want to let anyone down. But it's that inner battle of like, do you follow your true calling or do you continue down this quote comfortable path that you've always known. And I really like that you highlighted how even if it's totally right for you and it's a point of growth, it does not mean that it's easy, does not mean it's comfortable, does not mean that there's not going to be some resistance met, but yet you still have to go down that path because that's what you're destined for. So there's so many beautiful highlights that you just came out there with. I love that. What were, as far as like people you work with and your clients, what are some of the biggest obstacles or barriers you see in people who maybe are people pleasers or perfectionists or overachievers? Like what's limiting them? Is it similar to your path or is it different?
Yeah, so a lot of the individuals that I work with that are, people pleasers, perfectionists, hyperachievers, self-doubt is something that really, and imposter syndrome is something that they really deal with. And that self-doubt can then come out in different ways, right? So some people will end up being extraordinarily anxious, and so they're really dealing with a lot of anxiety. Some people will deal with it by just going constantly, so they're dealing with burnout. And then I'm working with individuals right now who are dealing with that high achieving perfectionist I need to control, and it's coming out in the form of eating issues, whether it's body image issues and just trying to control that, or just eating disorders in general. Now, as a coach, I don't actually treat the actual active eating disorder, but what we're doing is, like, for instance, I'm working with somebody right now who went through the intensive therapy to work on the actual treatment of the eating disorder. And now we're doing a lot of the work around it, which is recognizing where the internal dialogue and the need for control and the need for, a lot of times with eating disorders and restriction, what an individual gets to experience is the first time of saying no. Right. So a people pleaser has a really hard time saying no. So when somebody is a people pleaser and a perfectionist and they have an eating disorder, most of the time what they're trying to really experience is the capability of saying no, I'm not going to eat that food. So what we work on is, can we get that experience from a different direction than not just through saying no about food? So it's interesting to see how we can have these personality traits, and they can be strengths. Let's be very clear that, there are times when perfectionism, like if you're a surgeon, being perfect and trying to be as close to perfect as you can definitely comes in handy. However, when we lean too far into these things, that's when it can start to hinder us. And that's when it can start to become a weakness. So, I've worked with doctors, I've worked with therapists, I've worked with professionals, executives across the board. When they have these high achieving personalities or these perfectionist personalities or these people pleasing tendencies, eventually they start to limit them in their ability to continue to move forward. We get to some type of stagnation. And also they start to either have addictive behaviors, whether it be with substances or, like we mentioned, eating issues, because they're trying to numb out or have some semblance of control in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you pointed out there's such a deeper level to eating disorders. It's not just the behavior that you're seeing, it's what's going on behind the scenes that you're living day in and day out on your head. And it's just that what people see is just the eating part or the weight part, the exercise part, or whatever it is. There's so much more that is going on that is creating that atmosphere for somebody to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm just working with athletes in general. I mean, we don't even think that athletes would suffer from this. I mentioned, like, dancers. Absolutely. My daughter is a ballerina, definitely have had that experience, just not just with her, but just with dancers in general. But athletes also, we don't think about it, but because so much of their lives is dictated and scripted and the need to be perfect in everything that they're doing. And eating disorders are definitely rampant. And we're not just talking about with figure skating, which of course, yes, that makes sense, or gymnastics, but like track and field, swimming. I've worked with a swimmer that had an issue with it. So it shows up in many different elements. And it all kind of comes back to, well, what are they experiencing through this, like through the eating disorder that they've created for themselves? What's that experience that they're trying to get? And why are they trying to get that? What's missing from their lives that allows that to be the thing that they're craving so badly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can attest to that because that was what I went through. I was a field hockey player and I had that slippery slope of like, no, I'm just an athlete. No, I'm just an athlete. And I lived like that. And I didn't realize it was an eating disorder until it completely got out of control. So there is very much those gray lines of like, no, this is what I do. I always level up, I'm always going to be the best. And I keep on striving for that starting position. I'm going to get this and that. that. And like, it becomes obsessive, but then
Mm.
it gets to a point where it's like, it's not just about the sport, it's much deeper.
Yes,
I can
yes.
completely relate to that.
Yep,
Absolutely.
yep.
And I think it is important to highlight that it isn't just happening in the sports that are looking at your figure. It's happening in many cases because there's so much pressure, I think, especially at the collegiate level, where there's scholarships on the line, there is prestige, there's competition, you know, you're going head to head with people. I mean, there's always that pressure to be the best.
Oh my gosh, my son is playing Division 1 right now, lacrosse, and I mean, honestly, that amount of pressure that those athletes face, and I'm going to say athletes, they're scholar athletes, because not only are they facing the athletic pressures, there's this, the school and the academic pressures as well. But when
Absolutely.
you're at that level, you know, something that I know he ended up dealing with that first semester was, you know, you're the top of the crop, so to speak, in your local community and in your travel world. And then suddenly you're thrust into this college level and everybody's the top. And suddenly now you're also thinking, where do I fit in? And so once again, with a lot of individuals, it's the need to control. So that's something that they can hold on to, because this I can control and I can be really good at this.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I don't know if you're, you know, experienced this, but like one thing that I experienced is that I got praised for that. And that
Oh,
just
for sure.
the fire, because you're like, wow, you're so disciplined. You're doing so great. And it's like, this is becomes your identity. It's not just like, you know, you are doing this because you feel like you need to, but it's like, this literally is who you are. So like to step away from that becomes very difficult when that is all you know. And that's how people know you. So
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point about the praise that comes with it, because what happens is, and again, yes, the athletes especially, they're getting praise for maybe even their physique, right? Like, oh my gosh, look at you, you're all muscle.
yeah.
And in the athlete's mind, they're thinking, well, that's because I am restricting, right? Like I'm counting, oh, I need to do more of that because then I'll keep getting that. And so like, it feeds upon itself. Or conversely, if you're not even an athlete and you just, it's the area that you know, that's the area that you end up controlling. You know, you're a high performer, let's say in school, you know, academically high performer, and then suddenly now you're at an Ivy League school, and everybody, once again, everybody's just as smart. And it's like, well, goodness, I mean, I work with a lot of college students, and so this happens a lot, where suddenly their identity, because it was all wrapped up in something back at home, now they're in this bigger environment and they're really struggling to find who they are in this bigger environment. And that is absolutely something that they can hold on to, and they can experience some semblance of ownership and identity through.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I also I would imagine it's also that point of fitting in versus belonging.
Oh
Like
yeah.
when you're
Yep.
in college, it's like you're all about fitting in. Where is my group, especially if you feel lost. But
Mhm.
when we try to fit in, it's the opposite of belonging. We're not belonging when we're only trying to fit in. So is that something you see with the athletes or college students you work with?
Oh, absolutely. We have conversations about this all the time. Because, and I love that Brene Brown brought it to the attention through her latest book, because there is so much around fitting in versus belonging. In terms of fitting in, and this is what we talk about, especially with my young adults, is the difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in is I'm changing and masking who I am in order for this group of people to like me and to accept me. And a whole while, there's this underlying fear that if they find out the real me, they're going to drop me in a hot second, right? And I'm going to be abandoned and left alone.
Mhm.
Versus belonging is I have shown up as myself and I'm with these people who just know me as I am.
Mhm.
And then we don't have this underlying undercurrent fear that that we're going to be abandoned at any given second, right? But when young adults do, when they're kind of, first of all, they're stepping out from their family of origin, right? It's probably one of the first times that they're out in the real world.
Yeah.
And so that safe zone, that safety net is kind of off to the side. And they're in this new group or in a new world where they don't know a lot of people. They're trying to figure out how to find their group, to your point, but they fall into the I need to fit in.
Mhm.
And so they actually change who they are in order to find that group of people as quickly as possible. A lot of individuals, like because I'll maybe start working with somebody in high school as a senior and then continue working with them through college. And every single time that fall semester, it is so much work around, there's no rush. You're not on a timeline to find your people, because so often they're so worried about not finding their people that they're willing to just jump into any group and fit in. And most of them end up getting really frustrated or feel really sad by the time, Christmas break happens or winter break happens, because suddenly they realize the people that they aligned with aren't really their people.
Mhm.
This has just happened. The reason why I'm talking about it is it's fresh in my mind because we literally just had, we went back to school recently, right, within the last couple of weeks. And I know a couple of the college students that I'm working with really struggled with that, because come the end of that first semester, they were like, what has just happened? I thought that I found my people and none of them are my people. And it was because just the mad rush to find them immediately.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I wish I could hear this conversation back when I was going through an eating disorder, because it really would have helped me so much, because I felt like I was so alone. And what you're describing is exactly how I felt. And I couldn't find my people, and everyone was out drinking. That really wasn't my thing. So I turned to exercise. Like, no, I don't drink, I exercise. So they
Exercise.
were all
Yep.
bonding over drinking, and I was exercising. And it just compounded things.
Yeah.
It got
Yeah.
worse. And
Yep.
so I would imagine, like, it's not only just fitting in when you don't have like an eating disorder or other things going on, but now if you have an eating disorder and people think you're an athlete, and now you know why you're actually exercising or eating the way you are, because it's a deeper issue with an eating disorder. So you can almost feel like a fraud in a way, like people see one thing and you know
Mhm.
what the real reason is. So it's like a perfect storm for things just to get out of control quick.
And then as you're going through that process and you're feeling like a fraud, that's the inner dialogue that's happening. And so then the whole time you're shrinking even further and further and further. And what I mean by shrinking too is isolating, isolating, isolating until we really are just alone and
Yeah.
you don't feel like you have anybody to lean on. And
Mhm.
that's when it can feel really just dark and truthfully, that's where we find a lot of, and it's not just girls, let's be very clear, both men and women end up in that place where they actually need that therapy to help them maneuver out of it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it is like, I think what compounds it too is like, especially and just going to the athletes or in college students, but you're told your whole life this is the best time of your life, best years of your life. And here you are, if you feel very alone and isolated, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm literally giving away the best years of my life. Like, and it is, again, it compounds that mad scramble to figure out how can I have fun and be
Mhm.
happy, and then I'm not happy. And it's like you can see how it just gets very messy in your head where
And then of course the shame, right? Because then we start shaming ourselves and thinking, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me, because clearly if it's supposed to be the best years of my life, there must be something wrong with me. And so
Mhm.
it's not even guilt. It
Yeah,
is absolute shame. And then now you've got shame on top. So even to work through the eating disorder, now we've got to unshame first before we can even get there. And let's be clear too, even when somebody has had an eating disorder, it sometimes takes them a while to even talk about it, because there is a potential for that to carry a lot of shame around why and how did I let that happen.
yeah,
And I know some of the dancers that I have worked with, that was one of the things that they didn't want anybody to know at first. And it's like we need to shift the focus on, it's not about other people at all. It's about you and coming back home to yourself, your values, how you choose to live, right? So one of the things, especially acceptance and commitment based coaching, helps a lot with eating disorders, because if we can come back to what's meaningful to you, then it's less about the actual eating disorder and let's like psychoanalyze it. And instead it's, can we make choices from a place of meaning to you? If we use that as our guiding light, our value system as our guiding light, from that place, we're actually owning and taking that committed action to living into what would mean something to move us forward, rather than hyper focusing on what did already happen, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, oh, totally. It's almost like living your authentic life. Like, this is
Yeah.
what you're destined to do. So let's make the choices around what feels authentic to you.
Yeah.
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 Oh, absolutely. And like for someone who, because secrecy is such a big thing around eating disorders, especially, I mean,
Yeah.
people do not want to disclose that they have an eating disorder. And I can relate to that myself. I did not tell anyone. But what do you think needs to change as maybe like a culture or in leadership, that we we as a whole, feel more comfortable to disclose what's going on at a deeper level, because I think there's still a big like stigma around this where people hide it and don't want people to know. And again, that just delays, and the
Mhm.
treatment delays people getting better, and snowballs what happens.
Well, I do. We already sort of mentioned it in terms of shame. Like shame has to be addressed in terms of the person on their own. But from a cultural and a societal standpoint, you know, I hate to put it in this terms, but it's like sometimes I just feel like we have to soften our hearts just a little bit more. There's so much judgment that we just pass. And the truth is, we don't know what somebody is going through. We are writing our own story and they're writing theirs. And if there's just, I talk so much about self-compassion and how that helps move us as individuals move forward, but it's just having compassion as a society for others and respect the fact that they're going through their own story. And if we can allow them that space to do that without having those, I mean, we all have opinions. I get that. But when we constantly are out there, especially on social media, and we're so quick to cut people down, when in fact, they're just trying to figure out their way through this life and through the world themselves,
Yeah.
having that compassion and recognizing that they're just humans, right? They're just humans trying to figure all the things out. That really does need to change. And I also think that part of what needs to change is the the immediate either assertion that somebody has an eating disorder, because sometimes people actually have a health condition. And so it's, instead of just making assumptions about people, it goes back to the 4 agreements, right? Don't make assumptions.
Mhm. Yep.
It is, part of it is, let's see if we can step back from making assumptions and actually just start having compassionate communication with people, really holding that space for what they might need. And if we can't do that, kind of step aside and just allow that person to be, and let them find the people who can hold that space for them so that they can talk about the things that they need to talk about in order to work through it and find their way to the other side of it.
Yeah, yeah, I think the compassion, like you're saying, I mean, that is such a huge thing where people can feel like they are free to actually discuss something. Because I think what I see with a lot of people I work with, and individuals I've known, but there's almost like they're afraid of that label, because now it's like once you open that door, it's the unknown. Well, now do I have to go here? Are they going to force me to do this? Like,
Right.
what's my path once I open that up? It becomes like in their head a slippery slope of like, I don't want to do all these steps. Like, it's that
Mhm.
fear again, and you almost don't want your eating disorder to go away because it's your only point of comfort. So I think
Oh,
what
for
you said,
sure. For
having
sure.
that passion would just allow someone to feel free to open up to that.
Well, and I do think too that people who have had eating disorders, one of the things that they face is not wanting to talk about it because they also don't want to answer a bunch of questions because people don't understand it. So then they keep pinging them and they keep pinging them and they keep pinging them. And they're like, why don't you just eat? Just go ahead and eat. And that's so detrimental to the person who's trying to heal through the process. And I do think that that's part of it too, is if somebody does choose to open up about it, allow them space to communicate on their terms rather than trying to force them into conversation about it.
Mm.
So yes, be open to conversation, but be kind with how you approach that person so that they feel emotionally safe to have the conversation, should they choose to have the conversation.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it's all about going at someone's pace and what's comfortable to them, because it's like if you force someone to go at a pace that you think is appropriate for them, you're only going to meet resistance and it may just backfire. So
Absolutely.
that's such a huge thing. How do you judge, like when you're working with somebody, how do you judge the pace that you feel like is appropriate for them? Like, how do you know that you're going at a pace that's comfortable for them?
A lot of what I do is, well, active listening, first of all, but I'll ask a question and based on their body's response, I pay a lot of attention to their body language, but also just truly being respectful. So anytime that I ask a question, and one of the agreements I make with my clients right at the very beginning is, if there's ever a point where something doesn't feel right for you, I want you to tell me, right? Because it's empowering them from the very beginning that they absolutely have a voice and that their voice matters more than anyone else's voice in our relationship. And that's also something with people who have been facing eating disorders. Their voice hasn't been heard for quite some time. They haven't even heard their own voice because it's been covered up. And so it's really important to create that safe space and to allow for them to be the lead, allow them. Like, I'm working with one individual right now, and there are some days she is just all in, like, wants to talk about, like, this is what happened and I was triggered by this, and she is just sharing. And then other days she is just not there and we're talking about boys, and it's like, that's totally fine. We
Yeah.
don't have to talk about that thing every single time. So a lot of the times it's really being, I coach from an intuitive place anyway, but it's really just showing up and feeling into where are they coming from and not forcing the issue. Because if you come into a session and you start just saying, okay, so tell me, how many calories did you eat? Once again, we're back to numbers. We're
Yeah.
back to numbers and we're back to measurement. And it's totally missing what it is that they're experiencing through the eating disorder.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah. And it really like is about healing from within. You can't put all these things on the outside, change the behavior, because if the messaging is not still there, it's only going to open up the wound again. Like, it's putting a band-aid on an open wound and expecting it to do the job. Like, it's never going to do the job. So yeah, such an important thing with when it comes to like self-care and working with individuals. What would you say is a good or what would you say? I know self-care is so individualized, but what would you say, like, recommend to someone as far as picking out a self-care routine that works for them and that is serving their purpose and their mission?
Well, a couple things in terms of self-care that I always I challenge people to come up with is, create their own joy list. For instance, what makes you smile from the inside out? And that's your cheat sheet in terms of self-care. So for some people, it's just sitting in quiet, drinking like a hot cup of tea. And it's like, that's great, wonderful. The other part that, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, that I really hone in on though, is self-kindness and self-compassion, right? How are you talking to yourself and implementing and integrating that into your everyday? So slowing down and paying attention to the words that you're choosing to use towards yourself. In the context of self-compassion, there's the concept of like kind hands or loving hands. So sometimes it's just offering yourself that same loving, compassionate touch. Like, sometimes if we're really having a lot of anxiety or we're spiraling out of control, sometimes it's just putting your hand over your heart and just being like, really closing your eyes and like feeling that, like, yep, I'm here. I'm here for myself, right? I'm being held, versus continually letting the thoughts just spiral out of, it's noticing the thought and then what can I do for myself in this moment to just ground. Mindfulness is another really important thing. Perfectionists, high achievers, we all suffer from the rumination of the past, or we're future tripping. And so mindfulness just in general is really important, but also when you're facing an eating disorder, really important to be in the here and now, because it's so easy to get caught up in decisions you may have made. Or, well, if I eat this thing, am I going to gain, and am I going to be fat? And especially with people who have anorexia, this is a
Right.
big thought that they have, is like, oh my gosh, but then I didn't exercise and I'm going to gain fat. And it's like, come back to the present moment, right here, right now. What's the choice that you're going to make that's meaningful to you?
Yeah.
Right. That's really important, because it's so easy to allow one to spiral out into the future or worry about the past.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And going off of like kind of talking more about the perfectionist mindset, with when you have perfectionism, it is always that like, I can't let my guard down because things will get out of control quickly. So you feel like you always have to like constantly be on top of things because it's like no one can do it better than I can do. So what would you say for people, not even just like with eating disorder behavior, but just in life in general, when, you do something and everything is 90% great, but you have that 10% and all they can focus on is that 10% that didn't go well. How do you work on shifting that mindset where they can stop looking at just a little bit that didn't go well and start looking at everything that is going well?
I will always say awareness is the doorway to change. And most perfectionists aren't even aware that that's their dialogue. They aren't even aware that the moment they say, like, if something goes, they've accomplished something, they'll notice they've accomplished it. And then they immediately go into the part that they don't like, or the part that, and I definitely have done this. I catch myself still doing it, right? It's like, I did that thing, but this wasn't, so we have to track that, and we need to start talking to ourselves. And then we go into this place of, I'm noticing the thought that I'm diminishing the thing that I just did. Right now we're diffusing ourselves. We're not actually, there's space between us and the thought. And from that place, we can start saying, well, what's actually true? What's actually true is I just knocked this thing 90% out of the park. That's amazing. And I'm going to celebrate that. And so it is finding even the little bits of gratitude, right? Because gratitude will build upon itself. So what's the right thing here? What went well? How did I grow from this situation? And as perfectionists, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy at all, because we are so predisposed and pre-wired to only look for the perfect. But the truth is, we're never happy. No matter what we do, we're always like, but this could have been a little bit better. Ask any dancer and you're like, oh my gosh, that was beautiful. And they're just like, but I could have pointed my toes just a little bit more in this one particular area. And it's like, wait, hold on. Out of that whole show, are you really going to focus on that one set where like your toes weren't specifically pointed? I have this conversation with my daughter all the time. So then I challenge her to say, what went well? What went well? And can we celebrate that?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. And kind of going off of that, as like a perfectionist, another thing that a lot of people struggle with is accepting help and not just doing everything on their own and taking on more than they can handle. So how do you take on that with people? Like, it's just like, they're always burdened by just, nope, no one can do it as good as I can. So it's just easier if I do it myself. So
Oh my gosh, totally. And I think as moms, we tend to do that too. Like, it's fine, I'll just do it myself because you're gonna just mess it up, but I'll load the dishwasher too, right?
Yeah, I can multitask. I'll take care of it. Don't worry. Like, yes.
It's challenging ourselves. A couple of things come up with that. One is recognizing that first of all, we're only one person. So we're at some point, we have to make that choice of, do I want to continue doing this until I burn out? Or do I actually want to create relationships with people and actually learn how to get that support and ask for that support, which isn't easy. However, the other part of it is recognizing that even if somebody doesn't do something exactly how we would do it, it's still getting done. It goes back to tying shoes. I just remember when my kids were little, there's the cheat way, right? Like the bunny ears.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's like the complicated way. And I remember with my first child, and probably even my second one, me being a perfectionist, was like, I'll just do it, because the bunny ear way would always come undone, right? It was the easy way. It would always come undone. And I was just, let me just do it. And the truth is, they were still getting their shoes tied. And by doing it for them or trying to take it on and be that perfectionist, what I'm also doing is robbing them of the opportunity to have an experience. So if we're really going to be perfectionists and we're going to really want people to have these experiences, what if we challenge ourselves and say, well, actually, the best choice I can make right now is allowing this person to have that experience rather than steal it from them. So that's a way that we can also reframe it in terms of the perfectionist mind.
Yeah, I love that shifting perspective, because I think sometimes it's like, when you're a perfectionist, you're like, well, I want the best for my kids. So if I do it, it'll be the best for my kids. But the way you're talking about it, and I completely agree, it's like you're only doing them a disservice if you are looking out for the perfectionist mindset. So I absolutely love that. One more thing, just kind of going off of like perfectionism, and people pleasing, setting boundaries. So this is a really tough thing for people, is setting boundaries and sticking to them, especially when it comes to people who suck your energy or suck your time or disrespect you. How do you go about helping someone who really suffers from that to get to a point where they have a healthy relationship with people?
So setting boundaries with somebody who happens to be a people pleaser, has a history of being a people pleaser, the very first thing I always say is, don't just like rip the Band-Aid and start setting boundaries because it's really scary for that person. And instead, it's the very first part is ask yourself in different life domains, like, what's okay, what's not okay. Really come to terms for yourself where your line is, because most people pleasers have no idea what that line even is. So before you go out willy-nilly trying to set boundaries, be very clear for yourself, what's okay, what's not okay. So when you're talking about romantic relationships, what's okay, what's not okay. Friendships, what's okay, what's not okay. Finances, what's okay, what's not okay. Really go through it for yourself. And then you start small and build up from there. So maybe somebody who isn't super scary to set a boundary with, you go ahead and you start there and you build up your confidence that way. It's also really important to be very aware that if you have not had boundaries with people and you start to set them, there is going to be pushback because they're human as well.
Mhm.
And they are used to you not having those boundaries. So going into it fully aware that there might be some pushback and just being honest in your communication, where it's what I've noticed. It's never, we never make use statements, but it's what I've noticed is like this particular thing no longer works for me. What I'm really needing is, and then go ahead and communicate the boundary. That's a loving way to let somebody know that this is something you're experiencing. This is what you're feeling from it. And this is what you're needing. And you're requesting this new boundary. They may have pushback. It's almost the best metaphor I have is like if you were to throw a pebble into water, it kind of ripples, but eventually calms back down. People are the same way. They're going to ripple at first and be like, what is this? What's this new boundary? Most people, as they love you and respect you, are going to calm down and be like, oh, okay, got it. Now, the people, the outliers who don't respect those boundaries and have a real problem with it, first off, they were probably the ones who were benefiting the most from your lack of boundaries. And second off, that's when you kind of need to do your own self-reflection. Is this person somebody I continue to want to have in my world? Because if this person can't respect the boundaries, can't respect my needs, is this really a relationship that I want to continue having?
Yeah, such great tools and tips because that is such a thing that many people struggle with. So, really good actionable steps that you can take to improving your life and the people around you. So, for anyone who wanted to connect with you or work with you, how can they find you? Do you have any new things that you're working on that you want to share? Let people know how they can work with you and connect with you.
Sure. So my website is kaminiwood.com and I am on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest with the handle It's AuthenticMe. I do work with individuals one-to-one. I'm working on a couple standalone courses just around things like imposter syndrome and people pleasing and narcissism and how to deal with those toxic relationships, which hopefully will come out by the end of this year or maybe mid to end of this year.
Yeah.
They're still sort of formulating in my mind, but I'm hoping to have them available. But if anybody wanted to connect with me, you can just head over to my website and easily connect.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I will put everything in the show notes for anyone listening so you can easily connect with Kamini. So thank you so much. I have genuinely enjoyed this conversation. There's so many things that I think really will resonate with people because there's so many things that you experience on a daily life that are just hard and they're complex and there's so many little things that go into it. So just having some tools or ways you can discuss it or maybe reframe it in your brain is just so important. So thank you for
Thank you
everything.
for having me. Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely. And for anyone listening, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and please leave any reviews, questions, or comments for myself or Kamini, and we would be happy to answer those for you. And thank you very much again for coming on to Rewiring Health.